Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins, where we're going to talk about the U.S. military and the National Guard being deployed to several large cities throughout the United States. Of course, Iran and its role in the Middle East. You know, Trump's trying to encourage them to, have a more positive role in the progress of peace, and the ongoing trade war between the United States and China, like we've mentioned before. A lot of tit for tat going on, but who's to pay for it? It's the consumers. To start us off this broadcast, President Trump has been sending National Guard troops to big cities throughout the United States. Now, Trump says it's meant to fight crime and immigration, while his opponents say that this is not what the president's powers are to be used for. Well, for more on this, we'll take a look at the following video.
Why is President Trump deploying U.S. troops to U.S. cities? He calls it the war from within. U.S. President Donald Trump has been dispatching large numbers of National Guard forces to a number of American cities, from Los Angeles to here in Washington. He says these cities are unsafe and crime-infested, especially the ones managed by elected Democrats, and that his crackdown on immigrants needs backup. In a speech to the U.S. military's top brass, Trump told them that American forces should use American cities as, quote, training grounds for our military, and that his enemies inside the country are no different than a foreign enemy. His critics argue that this is not what U.S. troops are for, and his actions are a straight-up power play against his political opponents meant to quash dissent, not to fight crime in a meaningful way. So by going on a war footing inside the United States, what is Donald Trump hoping to achieve?
The 1807 Insurrection Act actually leaves the president an enormous amount of authority for the use of active duty American military for domestic law enforcement. The president has unchecked authority if he invokes the Insurrection Act. If he doesn't, there are basically three ways an American president can use our military in domestic circumstances. Mostly he is constrained by an 1878 legislation, the Posse Comitatus Act, which requires either Congress to use its statutory authority to permit the president in specific instances, or for governors to request assistance. The only other way that the president can use the American military for domestic law enforcement is if he invokes the Insurrection Act. But if he does that, he has very wide latitude to act, and that's what was clear a year ago. Both the Insurrection Act and the Posse Comitatus Act serve to limit the ability of the president to use the American military for domestic repression. They're both limiting legislation. And what's so dangerous is the way the president has flipped the arrow on that and is using them, testing the legal and constitutional boundaries of his authority in order to use the American military domestically.
Only in recent decades did politicians somehow come to believe that our job is to police the far reaches of Kenya and Somalia, while America is under invasion from within. We're under invasion from within. No different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out. These people don't have uniforms. But we are under invasion from within. We're stopping it very quickly. After spending trillions of dollars defending the borders of foreign countries, with your help, we're defending the borders of our country from now on.
Well, Katan, that is really getting people to question the president's authority. Obviously, everybody is not on board with those pretty pretty tough stance that President Trump is taking right now. So we're going to have to see where it goes from here.
That's right.
Well, in Chicago, an undocumented immigrant crashed an SUV into a Border Patrol, and then in return, the Border Patrol vehicle crashed into the SUV to try to stop it. Now, the crowd in the area started throwing things at those federal agents. In response, the federal officers deployed tear gas. Now, 13 of those officers were exposed to that tear gas. So the tensions are higher as reports are coming in that cartels are offering cash to people targeting ICE officers and other federal agents.
Wow. Well, those cash offers vary by the offense, of course, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 for kidnapping or assaults on officers, and as high as $50,000 for the assassination of high-ranking officials. Well, the President Trump says that this is just a part of his ongoing plan to crack down on crime within our borders, that is, sending of the National Guards to these various cities. But Chicago and other mayors aren't on board with the president's plans and, of course, his subsequent actions.
Well, with the ongoing government shutdown, many who depend financially on the government are wondering if they'll get paid, including the U.S. military. Now, President Trump is directing Pete Hegseth to use all available funds to pay members of the military October 15th. Now, military members are a part of the essential employee group expected to keep working during the shutdown.
The funds for their pay is coming from the Department of War's Research and Development Department. Well, meanwhile, other federal cuts are looming for several other departments, including Treasury, Energy, Homeland Security, and Health and Human Services, of course, just to name a few. Now, the White House says that it's making these cuts to afford essential services, and President Trump, though, said that these cuts are an opportunity to eliminate programs supported by Democrats.
Well, President Trump is traveling to the Middle East as the Israel-Hamas agreement has begun. Now, the agreement was signed in Egypt. More on how those efforts are unfolding in this next video. Take a look.
President Donald Trump now traveling on his way back to the White House after a whirlwind trip to the Middle East.
The president first went to Israel as the last living hostages held by Hamas were released. Mr. Trump then traveled to Egypt to sign the peace agreement, which has brought an end to hostilities in the 2-year war between Israel and Hamas.
And while the prospect for peace does look promising, there are still so many issues in this deal that still do need to be worked out. Julie Sirkin with NBC brings us up to date.
In Israel, cheers and tears as 20 living Israeli hostages held for 738 days returned home in emotional reunions with their families, freed from Hamas captivity after Israel and Hamas agreed to key elements of President Trump's peace plan. Flanked by leaders from around the world, the president officially signing the deal in Egypt, where negotiators reached the historic agreement late last week.
This is the day that people across the region and around the world have been working, striving, hoping, and praying for.
It brought an end to more than 2 years of fighting. For now, a ceasefire, the first phase in a 20-point plan toward a lasting peace. Since hostilities ended, thousands of Palestinians have made the trek back to northern Gaza, and hundreds of aid trucks have begun pouring into the devastated region, carrying much-needed food and medical supplies.
The hostages are back. The hostages are back.
The president starting his whirlwind day in Israel, where he addressed the country's parliament just hours after the hostages were released.
This is not only the end of a war. This is the end of an age of terror and death and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God.
But many questions remain, and many details still need to be worked out. Will Hamas disarm and cede power? Who will govern Gaza? And will the ceasefire hold? President Trump believes it will.
This took 3,000 years to get to this point. Can you believe it? And it's going to hold up, too.
As part of the agreement, Israel also handing over hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and people detained during the war. And in Israel, while today is all about celebrating the living hostages that have been returned to their families, Hamas is also expected, as part of this deal, to turn over the bodies of 28 hostages that have either been killed by Hamas in captivity or died while being held there. Many families still waiting as search operations are ongoing in Gaza for those bodies.
Well, you know, he is one of many presidents that have been involved in trying to bring some type of peace and stability to the Middle East. He's made it his goal to do so. He's tried where others have failed. We'll see what the turnout will be in this presidency.
Right, and that's a great point because a lot of U.S. presidents try to solve that problem. It seems like many of them have had their hand in offering a solution or in their ways, or their ideas, something to get those two sides to unite.
That's right. Well, in a recent press interview, President Trump spoke on Hamas's disarmament, and he made it clear that if they don't disarm, then force will be used. Well, in an interview with ABC News Live and General Robert Abrams, the general spoke about disarmament and the hurdles that lie ahead. Take a look at this next video.
All right, we were going to have a whole discussion among our panel. We do have two of our correspondents with us, but General Robert Abrams, I want to take it right to you because we were listening to this in real time. He said point blank, if Hamas does not disarm, we will disarm them. Sounds like this could get ugly.
It certainly has the potential to get really ugly, Kira. I'd say up the front, I don't think when he says we, it's U.S. troops with boots on the ground doing the disarming. It'll be other people, most likely the Israeli Defense Forces. I've done disarming of militant groups before. It's really hard. It's really ugly. There's always going to be problems. There's going to be it has the absolute chance of escalating back into a full conflict. Hamas has not said that they will disarm. We all know it's part of the peace deal, but they have not publicly stated, nor in writing, have they agreed to it. And so the president's made a very clear statement, but it will likely have to be by force, and that force will largely probably be the IDF.
So what you're saying is that the president is making it clear that he will help Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Force go right back in and do whatever they need to do to eliminate Hamas if Hamas does not lay down arms. It doesn't mean U.S. troops in any way, shape, or form are going to get involved in this conflict in Gaza.
Right. I think there's potential also for other regional partners, right? So the other signatories, you've got Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, right? They could certainly, right, put a force on the ground for peace enforcement to help disarm.
Well, Ketan, President Trump, they're very serious, very strict in saying that, look, they're going to disarm or else, kind of giving them that ultimatum.
That's right.
Well, while the negotiations for peace were taking place in Egypt, one country was not represented among them. That country was Iran. It's no surprise, though, because Iran has been a huge supporter of Hamas, supplying them with weapons, training, and money, as well as military intelligence. While Hamas has been weakened, it does not appear that it has backed off from holding onto Gaza completely.
That's right. President Trump not only spoke about Hamas needing to relent from the fighting, but Iran as well. The president said, quote, "There's nothing that would do more good for this part of the world than for Iran's leaders to renounce terror, stop threatening their neighbors, quit funding their militant proxies, and finally recognize Israel's right to exist," end quote.
Well, Trump went on to say that he wasn't saying this to Iran out of weakness, but, quote, "We are ready when you are, and it will be the best decision that Iran has ever made, and it's going to happen," end quote.
Well, trade wars are coming back to life in Trump's second term, with President Donald Trump threatening to impose 100% tariffs on all Chinese imports. Well, the American president said it was in response to China announcing new export controls on rare earth elements, which are essential for everyday electronics and military equipment.
Well, if Trump makes his threat a reality, China will not take it lying down, saying they will fight to the end with a trade war if the trade war actually breaks out. Now, all of this is occurring while at the same time the two world powers were trying to reach a deal concerning trade between themselves.
So why is this coming up now? What is really going on between China and the U.S., and how will it resolve? Well, please take a look at this video from CBS News 24/7, which gives us some more background on the situation.
President Trump seemingly reignited the U.S.-China trade war after threatening China with a 100% tariff. That's on top of the 30% tariff that's already in effect. Trump made the announcement on Friday in response to Beijing tightening up its rules for rare earth exports needed to produce several electronics. Financial markets showed major signs of concern following those comments, but they regained a bit of traction after the president posted on social media that, quote, "It will all be fine."
Yeah, so you are seeing the markets rebound quite significantly, not completely washing out those losses that we saw on Friday. We were close to, the Dow was down close to 900 points, the NASDAQ down over 800 points. So Friday was the biggest sort of drop that we have seen in months when it comes to the market for, a change in the tariff strategy. That being said, the president walked back some of those threats, sort of, but we still have that 130% tariff that would set to take effect November 1st. He didn't go so far as to walking that back. But again, investors taking heart from a little bit of the calming down in the rhetoric. What I do want to highlight, though, is this is the first big sort of visceral reaction we've seen from investors in months when it comes to tariffs. And it's for three reasons, Mugo. One, everyone remembers that Trump 1.0, the trade war, that yes, there were moments where it looked like Beijing and the U.S. were going to make a deal, but it actually took over 2 years. So I think investors were going, oh gosh, I have PTSD from that. It's Groundhog Day. This is the second time around. Yeah. And then the other part of it is that if you have a 130% tariff that goes into effect on November 1st, because remember, we've got that 30% tariff and it would be 100% on top of it. Let's think about what the Fed is going to do at the end of October when they meet. They don't have the data that we've talked about before because of the government shutdown, and then they have the prospect of this looming tariff. You could see them say, I'm just going to wait and see. I'm going to pause on making any interest rate moves. And that's also why you saw that visceral reaction in the market on Friday, because investors want interest rate cuts. Now, like I said, we're seeing that rebound today, but I think it really does speak to China and the tariffs. This is really that thing that can move the market that investors get concerned about.
Yeah, and speaking of China, Kelly, how have they responded? And does this hinder any progress when it comes to those trade negotiations?
So China has responded rather strongly. I'll just share a quote from their foreign affairs spokesman that was made today. He said, quote, "China urges the U.S. to promptly correct its erroneous practices. If the U.S. insists on going its own way, China will certainly take resolute measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests." So, of course, reacting from that threat from President Trump. But I do want to highlight that a lot of the analysts that I talk to do not put the blame on the president here, that it was really China going back to last week that reignited this tit-for-tat trade war when they put those export controls on those very important rare earth minerals. I know everyone's at home is probably like, what is that? It's important for everything from your car to your cell phone to your semiconductor chips. It's really an important piece for a lot of companies, especially tech companies in this country, in order to make their products. And China owns 70% of the global resource. So,
well, Katan, China is very strong economically. So, if Trump does go ahead and decide to do like this 100% tariffs on all Chinese imports, as you mentioned, it's going to hurt the consumer the most. So that's really going to be interesting. Americans are going to have to brace themselves. Prices are already high and could go even higher.
That's right.
Well, while Trump was traveling on Air Force One, he said he might consider selling Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Now, such a move would escalate the war between Russia and Ukraine to a new higher level. Trump's comments came after a phone call with President Vladimir Zelensky, who is pushing for stronger military support to launch counterattacks against Russia.
Right. Trump and Zelensky are scheduled to meet at the White House on Friday, making this their third meeting this year. But President Vladimir Putin warns that if Washington supplies Tomahawks to Kiev, it will not only escalate the war, but cause U.S.-Russia ties to deteriorate.
Well, a Tomahawk missile has a range of 2,500 kilometers, or about 1,500 miles, which would mean Ukraine could reach Moscow with this missile. Now, while they can be launched from a submarine or ship, these cruise missiles fly at very low altitudes and supersonic speed. It is difficult to detect and can be retargeted through in-flight calculating with data links, changing its flight path to maneuver around land obstacles multiple times before hitting their target.
Interesting. Russia's response has been that they will shoot down Tomahawk missiles and bomb their launch sites if the United States goes ahead and decides to supply Ukraine with these weapons. Now, this is not the first time Russia has dealt with these weapons. They also had to tackle them in Syria, according to Russian lawmakers.
And Katan, this really would be a game changer for both sides, Ukraine and Russia. Of course, Ukraine wants us to launch their counterattacks, but Russia isn't going to take it lying down. Right. This would be quite an upscale of firepower for Ukraine to use against Russia. And many times Russia has practiced restraint, but they always throw out that ultimatum, and this is a red line you're about to cross if you do this. So President Trump wants to improve the relationships with President Putin, right. But this, of course, would seriously strain those relationships.
That's right. And nothing so far has worked in the face of, these retaliatory attacks, even when, they've made what looked like some type of headway towards peace. And then, a few days later, they're right back at attacking each other, both, Ukraine and Russia. So, the president's got a lot on his plate. He wanted to take on this big burden, and he has been going at it, pretty much headlong. But, all eyes on the international community are watching how the United States is going to handle these two conflicts, both the ones in the Middle East and the one with Russia and Ukraine, because the United States has been involved since the 1800s in many big wars. And, of course, that fighting is what established the United States as a chief nation amongst all other nations.
Right, and it seems like their military is really the only way that they go at it. The dialogue between the United States president and other presidents of the countries, it just seems like it doesn't last long, if at all.
No, it doesn't.
Well, if you want to learn more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. You can visit them by going to any of their websites at yahweh.com, yisroelhawkins.com, and yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And don't forget the Israel Says and Ask Israel program available online 24/7 for you. You can find those sites by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another classic message from Yisroel Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thank you for watching.